Neo-Avalon was a city of lights and steel, a sprawling hub where humanity had built its dreams among the stars. Skyscrapers glimmered against the deep black of space, and transport tubes carried people faster than any ship could. Yet, for all its beauty, the city was a place where danger was never far away. Humans had colonized hundreds of planets, but the outer worlds were wild and untamed. Monsters, predators, and strange, alien landscapes waited for those who dared to explore. In the heart of Neo-Avalon, the Hunter Guild towered above all else. It was a place where humanity's bravest and sometimes its most reckless tested their skills against the unknown. Legends spoke of hunters who had faced creatures so powerful they could crush a starship with one swipe. Yet today, the guild was focused on its youngest members, the apprentices. Kale was one of them. A boy of 17, he looked ordinary at first glance. He had messy black hair, keen gray eyes, and a lean frame. Many in the guild ignored him, calling him cautious and slow. He carried no flashy weapons and had none of the bravado of other apprentices. He did not boast, and he did not rush into danger. To the veterans, Kale seemed like he might never amount to much. But Kale had a secret. While others relied on strength, he relied on observation. He could read patterns in the environment, notice small movements, and anticipate the behavior of animals, and sometimes even humans better than anyone else his age. When a simulation of alien predators ran in the guild's training arena, Kale's performance stunned the instructors. While the other apprentices struggled, Kale moved calmly and decisively, predicting every movement of the simulated beasts. "Impressive," said Master Roran, one of the guild's senior hunters. His voice was rough, and his eyes had the weight of experience. "Most of these apprentices panic. But you think differently." Kale shrugged, hiding the excitement in his chest. Praise from Master Roran was rare. "I just notice things," he said softly. "Notice things," Roran repeated. He gave a faint smile. "That may be enough to save your life someday. Or someone else's." For Kale, that someday came sooner than anyone expected. The guild had received a distress call from the Zethera mining colony, a remote settlement on the edge of explored space. Reports spoke of a ravager beast attacking workers, tearing through defenses, and leaving nothing but destruction behind. The creature was unknown to most humans, and the few who had seen it described it as massive, intelligent, and terrifying. Even seasoned hunters hesitated. The council met in the guild's high chamber, voices low and tense. "We cannot send novices," one hunter said. "The Ravager is not a creature to toy with. We've lost experienced hunters to lesser beasts. Then we must send the best," another countered. "Roran, you will lead the team." Kale stayed quiet. His heart raced. Every apprentice wanted to prove themselves, but few dared face a creature the guild feared. And yet, Kale felt no fear. Not yet. Instead, he felt curiosity. The idea of observing and understanding the beast, rather than fighting blindly, drew him in. I can go," Kale said before he could stop himself. The chamber went silent. All eyes turned to him. The other apprentices stared, mouths open. Master Roran raised an eyebrow. "You?" he asked, his voice sharp. "Do you even understand what you are volunteering for? This isn't training. This is death waiting for the foolish." "I understand," Kale said. "I want to learn. And maybe I can help." The council whispered among themselves. Some laughed at the idea. Others shook their heads. Yet Kale's calm, determined tone made them pause. Eventually, Roran spoke. "Very well. You may go as an observer. But you will be under my supervision. You do not act without my command. Understand?" Kale nodded, fighting the excitement that threatened to spill over. He had a chance. A real chance. The journey to Zethera was long and perilous. Kale boarded the transport ship with a few veteran hunters, including Master Roran. The stars streaked past as the ship jumped through hyperspace. And Kale spent the time studying maps and reports of Zethera. He learned about the forests, the rivers of glowing liquid, and the creatures that lived there. But one thing stood out: the Ravager beast had been seen near the cliffs of Ebon Ridge, a treacherous area where even seasoned hunters had failed. When the ship landed, Kael stepped out and felt the alien air on his face. The world was alive with strange sounds. Trees with crystal-like leaves shimmered in the light of the twin suns. Strange insects buzzed with colors he had never seen. And in the distance, a low rumble echoed, shaking the ground. "That's it," Roran said quietly. "That's the Ravager." Kael's eyes widened. The creature was enormous. Its body was covered in dark, scaly armor that shimmered in the sunlight. Its eyes glowed like molten gold, and yet, it moved with a surprising grace. Like a predator that knew every step of its domain, Kael felt no fear, only awe. "Keep your distance," Roran whispered. "We'll observe first. Then we'll plan." "Don't make a move unless I tell you," Kael nodded. He crouched behind a ridge, watching the creature. Something about the way it moved intrigued him. It was intelligent, calculating, and aware of its surroundings. Most hunters would have attacked immediately. But Kael realized something crucial: the Ravager wasn't mindlessly violent. It was defending its territory. He noticed subtle signs: footprints, bent branches, and small disturbances in the soil. The creature was avoiding certain areas, perhaps aware of traps or dangers he could not yet see. Kael made mental notes, recording every movement and decision. Hours passed, and the Ravager continued to patrol. The hunters whispered strategies among themselves. But Kael remained silent, observing patterns. Finally, the creature stopped near a river, its massive head lowering to drink. Kael saw an opportunity. He whispered to himself, "If I can just predict its next move." Suddenly, the ground trembled. The Ravager froze and sniffed the air. It had sensed something, perhaps Kael. The apprentice's heart pounded, but he stayed perfectly still. The creature's eyes scanned the ridge, and then, after a tense moment, it turned and disappeared into the dense forest. The hunters exhaled. They had expected a fight, but none had come. Kael had not acted, yet the creature had gone. Roran studied him with a new respect. "You didn't move," Roran said. "Why?" "Because I didn't need to," Kael replied. "It wasn't attacking us. It was just cautious." "I think I understand its pattern." Roran frowned, impressed despite himself. "Interesting. You may have a gift, boy. But remember, understanding is not enough if we are caught unprepared." Kael nodded. He knew the real challenge was just beginning. This was not a simulation. This was life and death, and he would need every ounce of his skill and instinct to survive. Over the next few days, Kael explored Zethera with Roran and a small team. He mapped trails, identified safe zones, and studied smaller predators. Each day, he noticed more about the Ravager, its habits, its hunting style, and even its intelligence. The creature was like nothing humanity had ever faced, but Kael felt he was beginning to understand it. Other hunters grew frustrated, often rushing into dangerous areas without planning. Kael, however, moved deliberately, avoiding unnecessary risks. He set up small observation points, and even used natural traps to study the Ravager from a distance. One evening, as the twin suns set, Kael sat by a cliff, watching the forest below. He thought about how humans had always faced the unknown with courage, creativity, and strategy. Strength alone was not enough. Humans survived because they adapted, learned, and used their minds to overcome challenges. The Ravager appeared again, moving through the shadows. Kael noticed how it avoided certain areas, how it reacted to environmental changes, and how it seemed almost aware of him. He whispered to himself, "I may be just an apprentice, but I can face this. I can learn from it. I can survive." For the first time, Kael realized that being an apprentice was not a weakness. It was an opportunity. While others relied on experience, he had clarity, patience, and a fresh perspective. Perhaps that was humanity's greatest strength. The night grew darker, and the forest around him came alive with alien sounds. Kael felt the presence of the Ravager nearby. He did not reach for a weapon. Instead, he studied, observed, and waited. In that moment, he understood something important. Survival was not about fighting every battle. It was about knowing when to act and when to wait, and Kale was ready. Kale had learned much from observing the Ravager beast, yet he knew understanding alone was not enough. The creature was dangerous, cunning, and strong. If he or any hunter made a single mistake, death would come swiftly. But Kale also knew something the other hunters often ignored. Raw strength and weapons alone were not always the answer. Strategy, patience, and intelligence could overcome even the most fearsome predator. The morning sun cast long shadows over the forests of Zythera. Kale and Master Roran were on a ridge overlooking a river bend where the Ravager had been spotted the night before. Veteran hunters argued among themselves, frustrated by the apprentice's cautious approach. "We need to strike now," one hunter barked. "If we wait, it will vanish again." Roran's eyes narrowed. "And rush blindly into death?" "No. Observation first. Plan second. Strike last. You forget what hunting means." Kale remained quiet, studying the creature's tracks in the soil below. He traced the path carefully, noting the broken branches, flattened plants, and disturbed stones. The Ravager had patterns, routines even, and small weaknesses that humans could exploit if they were clever enough. "Watch this," Kale whispered, pointing to a series of footprints along the riverbank. "It avoids the high ground near the cliffs. That tells me it senses danger there. It prefers lower, covered areas for hunting." The hunters exchanged doubtful glances. Most of them relied on force, believing only in fast attacks and overwhelming power. Kale's analysis was different. It was precise, calculated, and, most importantly, effective. Over the next several days, Kale devised a plan to study the Ravager more closely, without putting himself in direct danger. Using the environment to his advantage, he set up observation points and traps that would reveal the creature's movements without harm. The other hunters watched in confusion as the apprentice spent hours crouched in the brush, taking notes and making sketches. "You are wasting your time," one veteran growled. "We should hunt it now, before it disappears again." Kale shook his head. "If we attack blindly, we might lose everything. I need to know it, understand it. Then we can survive, and maybe even succeed." The veteran huffed in frustration, clearly unconvinced. Yet even Roran, who had trained hunters for decades, found himself intrigued by Kale's method. There was a quiet intelligence in the apprentice, a patience that many older hunters had forgotten. Late one evening, Kale decided to test his understanding of the Ravager. He left small, harmless baits along a trail, carefully marking each position. Then he hid in a nearby thicket and watched. The Ravager appeared, moving silently through the trees. Its massive eyes glowed in the dim light. Kale held his breath, noting every twitch of muscle, every adjustment in its steps. When the creature approached the bait, it paused, sniffing the air. Then, as if testing the trap, it nudged the object and moved on, leaving the bait untouched. Kale smiled quietly. "It is cautious," he whispered. "It senses danger, but it will make mistakes. Eventually." Roran, observing from a distance, stepped closer. "You see more than most hunters in an hour than they do in a week," he said. "But don't let admiration blind you. This beast is clever. One mistake, and it will kill." Kale nodded, already thinking several steps ahead. "I know. That's why I watch. That's why I wait. Humans survive because we learn, adapt, and plan. Strength alone is not enough." Word of Kale's approach spread quickly through the guild. Other colonies whispered about the apprentice who studied the Ravager instead of fighting it. Some laughed, calling him lucky. Others were curious, wondering how a single human could outsmart a creature that had killed seasoned hunters. Then came the next challenge. A report arrived from the mining colony. A pack of smaller predators, seemingly drawn by the Ravager's presence, was attacking workers near the river. The veteran hunters wanted to strike immediately, But Kyle saw another opportunity. These smaller predators are dangerous, but predictable, Kale explained. If we can trap them, we can study the group behavior. It may give us clues about the Ravager itself. Roran hesitated, then nodded. Do it your way, apprentice. But I'll stay close. If anything goes wrong, we intervene. Kale spent hours setting up a series of environmental traps, using fallen logs, narrow canyons, and natural choke points to channel the predators. He did not harm them, only guided their movements so they could be observed safely. When the predators approached, they moved exactly as Kale predicted, falling into his traps, one by one. The veteran hunters were astonished. How did you know? One asked. Kale shrugged. I didn't predict every movement. I just understood their nature. Strength alone does not guarantee survival. Strategy does. The success earned Kale a small measure of respect. But he knew the real test was still ahead. The Ravager itself. Several days later, Kale noticed a change in the forest. The Ravager's movements became bolder, more deliberate. It seemed to recognize that humans were in the area, but it also tested its boundaries. Kale realized this was the moment to make a move, but not with brute force. Using his knowledge of the terrain, he set a careful trap. Large rocks, carefully balanced logs, and a series of narrow paths created a natural corridor. Kale studied the creature's likely path, anticipating its decisions step by step. He positioned himself where he could observe without being seen, relying on his instincts to guide him. When the Ravager appeared, Kale's plan worked flawlessly. The creature followed the corridor, reacting exactly as he predicted. Small boulders blocked certain paths, forcing it to adjust, revealing patterns in its movements. Kale noted each reaction, each hesitation, each adjustment. Finally, the Ravager paused, sensing Kale's presence. It roared, a sound that shook the trees and sent birds scattering into the sky. Most hunters would have panicked, but Kale remained calm. He did not move. He simply observed. After a tense moment, the creature turned and retreated. Kale's careful planning had allowed him to study it up close without confrontation. Roran stepped forward, clapping Kale on the shoulder. You did well. You could have been reckless, like the others, but you were smarter. That is the difference between an apprentice and a master. Kale smiled, though he remained focused. I am not a master yet. I only understand a small part. But I know we can survive this if we keep thinking ahead. Kale's growing reputation began to reach far beyond Zythera. Colonies that had never heard of him now whispered about the apprentice who could outsmart apex hunters. Even some of the older, more respected hunters began to approach him for advice, yet Kale did not let pride take hold. He continued observing, learning, and planning. The next challenge was inevitable. The Ravager would eventually test him directly, and Kale needed to be ready. One night, under a sky full of stars, Kale set up a final observation point near the cliffs of Ebon Ridge, the same place where the creature had been first sighted. He positioned himself with care, using shadows and natural cover to remain unseen. The wind carried the scent of alien flora, and the distant roar of the Ravager echoed through the cliffs. When the creature appeared, it moved slowly, deliberately, as if testing the apprentice. Kale held his breath, noting its every move. The Ravager's golden eyes scanned the ridge, its muscles tensing and relaxing with uncanny precision. Then, unexpectedly, it stopped. It sniffed the air, then stared directly at Kale's hiding spot. The apprentice froze. He could feel the tension in the air, the unspoken challenge between human and predator. For several long minutes, they stared at each other. Kale understood something crucial in that moment. The Ravager did not see him as prey. It saw him as something else different, unpredictable, worthy of caution. Kale whispered softly, I am not here to fight, only to understand. You and I, we are both survivors. After another tense pause, the Ravager turned and disappeared into the forest. Kale exhaled, relief and triumph washing over him. He had survived the encounter without a fight, using intelligence instead of weapons. Roran approached, his face unreadable. Finally, he said, "You are no longer just an apprentice. Humans may have underestimated you. And perhaps the galaxy is beginning to understand the same." Kale looked out over the forest, the twin suns rising in the distance. He knew the greatest challenges were still ahead. But he also knew something else. Humans had an advantage. The galaxy often overlooked. They were clever, adaptive, and fearless when they needed to be. And Kale was just beginning to show the galaxy what that meant. Kale had spent weeks learning from the Ravager, understanding its habits, its intelligence, and the dangers it posed. Each day, he became more confident not because he was stronger, but because he knew more. He had proven to himself and to others that careful observation, patience, and clever strategy could match, and even surpass, raw power. The guild called a meeting in Neo-Avalon. Reports of multiple Ravager sightings had come from neighboring colonies. The creatures were not isolated anymore. They were moving across the frontier, threatening miners, settlers, and explorers. Veteran hunters looked grim. Many had survived encounters with smaller predators, but even the bravest feared the Ravager. Roran addressed the council. "We cannot rely on strength alone. If we send standard teams, we risk losing more lives. We need a new approach." All eyes turned to Kale. The once overlooked apprentice now carried a quiet authority. His experience with the Ravager had already begun to reshape how humans approached dangerous creatures. "I can lead a team," Kale said calmly. "We can defend the colonies if we think ahead, use the environment, and plan carefully. We cannot fight blindly, but we can survive, and even win." The council hesitated. Some doubted that a young apprentice could lead seasoned hunters. Yet the results on Zythera spoke louder than doubt. The council finally agreed, granting Kyle command of a special team. Kale's team was small but skilled. Each member was carefully chosen not for brute strength, but for intelligence, adaptability, and courage. They trained together, practicing tactics Kale had developed from his observations of the Ravager. They learned to use terrain to their advantage, set traps without harming creatures unnecessarily, and predict the movements of predators before they happened. The team set out to a cluster of colonies recently attacked by the Ravager. As they approached, the devastation was clear. Buildings were flattened, equipment destroyed, and the terrified inhabitants hid among the wreckage. Kale studied the damage carefully, noting patterns of destruction. The Ravager was not chaotic. It was purposeful, strategic, and aware of its surroundings. "We cannot fight it head-on," Kale explained to his team. "It is stronger than any one of us, faster than most, and smarter than you might think. But humans have something it does not: creativity, observation, strategy. If we act together, we can force it to make mistakes. Stader Maruna, we long to Maya. Also, and Maya part to do. We long to Maya part to do. To Tenjis for wither zo. And Stader Maruna. And Tenjiso. And Pervisis. Adder." The team nodded, trusting Kale's calm authority. His reputation had grown in these outer colonies. Stories spread of the apprentice, who outsmarted the apex predator. Humans were beginning to see themselves not just as prey, but as thinkers, planners, and survivors, capable of facing dangers that other species would avoid. The plan was simple but risky. Kale studied the landscape and identified natural choke points where the Ravager would be forced to move slowly or make choices it could not avoid. Using ropes, logs, and terrain, he set traps designed to guide the creature rather than harm it. As night fell, the team moved into position. KL led them silently through the alien forest. Every step was calculated, every shadow noted. The Ravager's glowing eyes appeared in the distance, moving with purpose and awareness. It had already sensed the humans, but it had not yet attacked. Kale whispered, "Wait. Let it make the first move. Patience is our weapon." The creature roared, a sound that shook the trees and sent small creatures scattering into the night. Most humans would have panicked, but Kale's team remained calm, trusting their leader's plan. The Ravager moved along the path Kale had anticipated. As predicted, the terrain forced it into the trap corridor. Logs blocked certain paths, narrow ledges limited movement, and boulders created obstacles. The creature reacted, trying to find an escape, but Kale had already accounted for every possibility. One of the hunters whispered in awe, "It's working. It's actually working." Kale nodded, eyes fixed on the beast. He knew the battle was not about brute force, it was about observation, understanding, and guiding the creature toward choices that humans could manage. The confrontation continued for hours. The Ravager tested every move, circling, leaping, and striking at shadows. But Kale and his team remained steps ahead. He gave precise instructions, anticipating every reaction. At one point, the Ravager tried to climb a ledge to escape, but Kale had already blocked the path with weighted logs. The creature paused, assessing the situation. Its golden eyes locked onto Kale for several long seconds. The apprentice felt a strange connection, mutual respect, a recognition of intelligence on both sides. The Ravager was not mindless. It was aware, cunning, and strong. And Kale realized that humans, too, were capable of unmatched cleverness when they worked together. Finally, Kale saw an opening. Using a combination of traps and guided paths, he led the Ravager to a wide, open canyon with no escape routes. The creature could not attack without risking itself. Kale signaled his team to hold their positions. The Ravager roared in frustration and circled, but it understood the situation. It was trapped, not by brute force, but by the cleverness of humans who observed, predicted, and acted with precision. Kale stepped forward slowly, showing no fear. The creature watched him, hesitated, and then, in an unexpected move, retreated into the darkness. Humans had not destroyed it. They had guided it, survived, and learned. The team erupted in quiet cheers, relief washing over them. Kale looked at the Ravager as it disappeared into the night and whispered, "We survived because we thought, because we planned, because we adapted." Roran approached, clapping Kale on the shoulder. "You have done what even the best hunters could not with strength, but with strategy, patience, and intelligence. Humans are stronger than we often believe." Kale smiled, though he remained humble. "It's not about being stronger. It's about understanding. Humans have always survived because we think, because we adapt, and because we never give up." The news spread quickly. Colonies across the frontier heard the story of the apprentice who guided an apex predator without violence. Humans began to see themselves not just as survivors, but as thinkers, leaders, and protectors. Kale became a symbol of what humanity could achieve when intelligence, courage, and unity were combined. Weeks later, Kale received another call. This time, it was from a distant colony facing a group of alien warlords who had begun raiding settlements. Veteran hunters were hesitant, afraid of the new threat, but Kale saw an opportunity. He assembled a small team, using the same principles he had developed with the Ravager: observation, understanding, and clever strategy. As the team approached the enemy forces, Kale analyzed their movements. Unlike other species, humans could adapt quickly, improvise, and learn. He guided his team to use the terrain, set traps, and outmaneuver the invaders. The battle was tense, but humans prevailed, relying on ingenuity instead of overwhelming force. The victory was celebrated across multiple colonies. Kale's name became known as the apprentice who had shown that humans were capable of outthinking even the most fearsome opponents. Apex hunters, alien creatures, and human settlers alike recognized that intellect, creativity, and courage could challenge anything in the galaxy. Kyle stood on a ridge overlooking a victorious battlefield, the twin suns of Zythera shining down. He thought about the journey that had brought him here. From a cautious apprentice, overlooked by others, to a strategist who inspired humans to see their own potential, Roran joined him quietly. "You have changed how humans see themselves," he said, "not through fear, not through brute force, but through intelligence and bravery. You have shown the galaxy what we are capable of." Kale nodded. "I am still learning, but I have seen what humans can do when we combine courage with cleverness. That is what makes us strong. That is why we survive and why we can thrive." The horizon glowed as the sun rose higher, casting long shadows across the alien landscape. Kale knew more challenges awaited, creatures and threats beyond imagination, but he also knew something else. Humanity's greatest weapon was not strength, speed, or firepower. It was their mind, their spirit, and their ability to think, adapt, and act together. KL had started as just an apprentice. Now, he was a symbol of human potential, a reminder to every colony, every hunter, and every human that the galaxy could underestimate them at their peril. Apex predators, warlords, and unknown dangers would soon learn the same lesson. Humans were clever, courageous, and unstoppable when they dared to lead with intelligence. And Kale, the once overlooked apprentice, would lead the way.